Set your rule and reign in our hearts again.
Do you feel like life has been put on hold? You know, in many ways, the pandemic has forced many aspects of life as we know it to come to a screeching halt. For a time, schools were shuttered, the workforce had slowed, churches and restaurants were forced to close. And so understandably, we're all anxious right now to see this put behind us. We want to see it all come to an end, and we want to get on with life as we know it. And yet, we find ourselves in the midst of the continued threat of infection and the instability of our culture. And because of that, many of us, we're very concerned. We're thinking, what's going to happen next? Sometimes it may even feel like that the world is coming to an end. 1 Thessalonians is one of the earliest letters of the New Testament, and in it the Apostle Paul instructs a young church to live on the tiptoe of expectancy of the return of Jesus. But in this particular church, their enthusiasm for Jesus' return had turned into an extremism. They had fallen into what might be called a prophetic paranoia. They had gotten so focused on the disturbing events of the world around them that they had become distracted from their daily responsibilities. In fact, the doctrine of the second coming had been misapplied by them, and it had produced in their lives practically disorder and undisciplined living. So Paul shows in 1 Thessalonians how the best way for you and I to prepare for the return of Jesus, the best way for us to prepare for life in the midst of uncertain times, is to simply just get on with living. And the best way to do that is to prioritize in your life the things that matter the most, the top priority of which being to love other people well. Our text this morning from our Stay Strong chapter reading from this past week is 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 9 through 12. First, here in verses 9 and 10, Paul shows how that the church needs to refocus in times like this. It needs to refocus on love. Now, certainly this church knew the importance of loving one another. He commends this church for how much they deeply loved one another. But we also need to be reminded of that importance, of the priority we need to place upon loving one another, and really about what it really means practically to love one another. Look at verses 9 and 10. But we don't need to write to you about the importance of loving each other, for God Himself has taught you to love one another. Indeed, you already show your love for all the believers throughout Macedonia. Even so, dear brothers and sisters, we urge you to love them even more. You see, when it comes to refocusing on love, it can be difficult to do that in trying times because we can be so distracted. It's easy to become fearful and obsessed and distracted whenever life is uncertain. It certainly has been easy to do that this year. I mean, with all of the end of the world drama that we've been experiencing, we need to remember what matters the most. And in this text, Paul highlights the importance of loving one another. But you know, sometimes we're confused about what that means. There's a lot of confusion about what love is and what it looks like. In fact, in Paul's day, when he wrote to this church initially, his culture was marked by lust. We see that in chapter 4 and verse number 5, that the pagans live for the sinful desires of their bodies. But they don't know God, Paul says. But the church, rather than being marked by lust, should be marked by love. Lust is selfish, but love is sacrificial. You see, our world celebrates the concept of love, but so often is confused about what true love really requires. So now in verses 11 and 12, Paul shows what it means to cultivate true Christian love toward other people. You see, love is more than just a simple feeling. It's a concrete action. It's a deliberate choice of how you choose to relate to other people. So how can we increase in love toward others? Well, Paul's advice takes a really unexpected turn. Look at verses 11 and 12. Make it your goal to live a quiet life, minding your own business and working with your hands, just as we instructed you before. Well, that's verse number 11. We'll get to verse 12 in just a second. But what's so unexpected is how Paul defines how to cultivate deeper love to other people. It's not what we would expect. He gives us three things we need to focus in on: live a quiet life, mind your own business, and work hard. Let's look at each one of them in turn. First, Paul says, live a quiet life. God sanctifies a quiet, simple, uncluttered, and unhurried life. We've been forced, I think, during some of the shutdown to really re-examine some things. And I think a lot of us have seen how that often we live life at too fast of a pace, and we don't take time to really settle in and focus on the things that matter most in life. I hope we'll learn this lesson during this time so that when we emerge out of the pandemic, we see that how truly loving other people means that we take time for others. You know, learning to live simply means being satisfied with what you've been given. When you're jealous and envious of others, comparing yourself with what others have and what you might not have, it erodes your love for others. But whenever you and I learn to live simply and satisfied, it opens our heart to be able to love other people well. When your life is quiet and unhurried, you have time for others. Secondly, Paul says, mind your own business. You know, modern media is built upon peering into the lives of other people. We obsess about what others are doing, and the envy of comparison poisons us. But Paul encourages us to mind our own business, because to love others well means we learn how to keep our opinions to ourselves. Instead of being so quick to analyze others or examine the lives of other people, instead of being so quick to want to talk about what other people are doing or try to fix other people's lives, we need to first sweep our own doorsteps and mind our own business. Thirdly, he says you want to love other people well and cultivate love, then work with your hands. Scripture dignifies work as a creation mandate. It's true that God placed a curse upon Adam and Eve to be able to have to work by the sweat of their brow as a result of their sin in the Garden of Eden. But if you look carefully at the creation account, you find that initially God gave work as a blessing to humanity. That whenever they were created, they were given the task to go and work and keep the garden and to be stewards of creation. We were made to reflect God's image in a variety of ways as human beings, but one of the ways that we reflect God's image is that our God is a creator, and we were made to be like Him, to go forth in the world and create and cultivate. We were just simply made to do that, and that's where we find a lot of our purpose and meaning in life. Well, love for other human beings means that we're responsible in that task, that we're responsible for our own lives, and we work hard and don't become a burden to other people. We don't take advantage of others and their goodwill toward us. Don't mooch off of your family or live off the government. Instead, Paul challenges you and me to work with our own hands. You want to live anticipating Jesus' return? Don't put on white clothes and go sit on a mountain and wait for Him to come. Instead, Paul says, go to work. Clock in on time. Put in a good day's labor and be a good, trustworthy worker. Now, certainly, there are going to be seasons when you and I go through difficulty and we need help. But normally, you should take care of yourself. Go home. Love your family. Speak good of your neighbor. Cut your lawn. Live a quiet life. Mind your own business. Work with your hands. And when Jesus comes, He will find you to be faithful, a faithful steward of what you've been given. You know, a primary reason that you and I need to reprioritize our love for one another by being responsible people is because of our witness to an unbelieving world. Jesus was clear that the single distinguishing mark of true followers of Him is the way that we love one another in John 13, verses 34 and 35. Well, when we live quiet lives and we mind our own business and work with our hands, we disarm a hostile culture, and as a result, we gain the respect of unbelievers. Look at what Paul says in the next verse of our text here. Verse number 12. Then people who are not believers will respect the way you live, and you will not need to depend on others. So Paul's argument here is that you and I as believers, whenever we're going through challenging times in our culture, need to reprioritize what matters most. And we need to love each other well, love people well, and put that at the top of the priority list. And the way that we love other people well is by being responsible people that work hard, that mind our own business, that look after our own affairs, and are responsible people. One of the greatest ways to have influence in the world around us is to be known as people in our culture who are kind, who are punctual, who are hardworking, trustworthy people of integrity. Well, as the pandemic has lingered, many people have been anxious about wanting to reopen everything. We wanted to reopen restaurants, reopen theaters, churches, and workplaces. We needed to get back to work, because work is important, and it gives us a sense of purpose and accomplishment. We were made to work. In so doing, we reflect the image of our Creator. And while that's so important, there is one thing that transcends even that. You and I were made to love. And in loving, we reflect our God who is love. So you and I, even in the midst of a real challenging period of time in our world, we need to focus on what matters most and do what we can to get on with living. Even whenever it's difficult to do so, there are ways that we can get on with life by loving other people well and not getting distracted from putting that at the top of the list. This is of first importance. For you and me, it's time for us to reopen our hearts to other people around us by being responsible people who love others well.
We lay down our lives for